So Alice in Borderland is one of the biggest deck game shows in the entire world, and is potentially one with some of the most fun games and insanely graphic deaths. Deaths that honestly might get this video taken down if I'm not careful. However, as I've done with Squid Game in the past, I'm here to explain every single death seen all throughout the show so far. And I mean them all, with no death being considered too small. So of course, without wasting any more time, let's jump over to the first death game and death scene in Alice in Borderland. Now we of course begin with the maze game, where players must select the right door in order to survive. Here we see a scared young girl named Minami begin to panic as the room fills with gas. She then immediately runs towards the alive door and gets shot through the head with a laser cannon from the sky, instantly showing us and all the other players just how serious this situation really is. We then see after Arizu and the others finally completed that game, that they run into a random man down a dark alley. A man who has ran out of visa time and has lost all will to continue the game. So of course, given this, just like the girl before, he gets shot through the head with one of the mysterious lasers from the sky. It's then at that moment that we also see all around us another 41 or so lasers begin to be shot off all around the city. Basically also meaning that at least 41 other players at this current time have also died elsewhere in the game. We then see during the next game, which is basically tag, that a masked killer is going around shooting people, with the first death being an unnamed man in a business suit that we see shot dead on the floor. We then see Nitobe, the weird guy following Arizu around in the fedora, also gets shot in the back as he runs from the killer. We then see that the salaryman that witnessed this death also gets so scared that he runs out of the arena and dies to the lasers from the sky, showing us that you must always remain in the game area in order to survive. We then see two young women also get tracked down and killed by the masked killer, with him shooting one before of course turning and shooting the other. Now after some time has passed without any killings, given the fact that we're running out of people to kill, Usagi managed to run into a fairly old oblivious lady who the killer soon shoots to death after Usagi evaded him by scaling the building like she's the female Spider-Man. We then see another random player named Jin act as bait and get shot and killed after he was betrayed by his friend Aguni. This was of course due to Aguni's need for him to run out of ammo before he could of course attack him. We then see towards the end of the episode, after Arizu and Usagi end the game by pressing both buttons, that both the shooters managed to die by getting their heads blown off by the explosive collars that were strapped around them, showing us that they too were just players in the game and had no real control of their actions. We of course then get some time to chill before moving on to the saddest episode of the show, and the episode that honestly left me completely heartbroken. You see, in this episode we get yet another game of death, only this one is a 7 of Hearts game, which if you didn't already know are considered the hardest kind of games in the entire show, on the account that they are designed to take what or who you care about most and use them against you. And of course in this case that is exactly what they did with both Karabe and Chota. For see, the game is hide and seek, only the twist is that the wolf in this game is the one who must hide, as when the timer ends whoever is still the wolf will survive, and whoever isn't of course dies. This basically means that only one of the 4 players can actually survive the game. So with that in mind, Karabe and Chota sacrificed themselves so Arizu could win, knowing only he had a chance of surviving this hellhole that they have arrived in. And to just go on a bit of a tangent here, I still think this is one of, if not the best and most saddest episodes in the entire show so far. And something that was incredibly shocking to find just 3 episodes in to the first season. Like, to hit me that deep so early on is absolutely insane. But now moving on, next we have a flashback scene where we see Usagi's dad supposedly kill himself after it came out that he lied about climbing Mount Everest. I say supposedly because nobody is ever shown, and it's just kind of believed that he died, but we really don't know for sure at this moment in time. So just in case he really is dead, I'll just mention it here and move on. We then move over to the next game of death, which is called Distance, and is a game where you must reach the targeted distance to survive. Only while you are traveling to this distance, there are animals and obstacles in your way. It's here that we get the first death of this game, which is a random player named Seizen, who gets jumped and eaten by a giant man-eating panther whilst trying to reach the goal. We then see towards the end of the game that another random player named Yamane gets crushed and killed by a giant tidal wave inside the tunnel, making for one of the more random and confusing deaths in the show so far, as it doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense for that wave to even be there in the first place, but hey, it was, so let's mention it. Now we then move over to the 5th episode of the show, where we begin by seeing another 5 or so lasers going off in the distance, again basically telling us that around 5 or so players have likely died elsewhere in the game. We then see an unnamed man fall to his death in one of the other games, before then seeing the dead body of a random person laying in the water of another, with it being presumed that that person had died to drowning or electrocution. We then see the bodies of at least 11 dead people in a dumpster, before later finding out that Hatter has also been killed by Aguni, although we don't actually see his body until the flashback in episode 8, however in that flashback it was clearly shown that he was shot and killed by Aguni himself. Although it should also be noted that Aguni did not want to kill him in this moment and was kinda just forced into it. Now again, back in episode 6, we also see that after discovering that she was the witch in the Ten of Hearts game, Momoka killed herself by stabbing herself through the chest with a kitchen knife, deciding that outcome is better than playing their twisted game. However, unintentionally, by doing this, she did also amount to a lot of unnecessary deaths that came in the very next episode. You see, the next episode begins with a lot of confusion around the game. So of course, given this and the fear that everyone was feeling, Samora soon stabs a random girl in the back, seeing that just killing everyone is the simplest solution to finding who the witch really is. We then see Naragi begin his killing spree by going around and shooting random people in this moment. We then see the militants also join in and start shooting random players of their own, with at least 2 bodies being seen piled up in the process. We then once again see Naragi shoot another of his own, before then telling a poor guy beside him to also do the same. We then get a quick run through of the cameras where we see several more players being shot and killed by the militants. We then also see another 2 random players get shot by Naragi whilst outside. We then see this poor bastard who was trying to help find Arisu get shot and killed by Seiko, the incredibly hot but also fucked up militant lackey that was following Aguni and Naragi. Now down the line and a little later into the game, we also see another few players also get shot and killed by another load of militant losers, before once again also seeing Naragi himself also add another kill to his ever-growing total. We then get a flashback for Samara, the freak with the sword, where we see several dead bodies laying on the ground with arrows sticking out of them. We don't know who killed them, just that they likely died during some fucked up game in the past. We then see several more people get shot and killed by the militants towards the end of that episode. However, going into the final episode of season 1, we see that the killing hasn't ended. As in the beginning, we get another look at that flashback from earlier where we see that the old Hatter has gone insane and murdered multiple people in his own room, claiming they were traitors and all traitors must die. But now back at the Ten of Hearts game, we see that after Aguni is starting a fight of sorts, that Kojo announces that she was in fact the dealer of the game and as a result gets shot through the head by one of the sky lasers, basically informing us that the game masters themselves did not like the fact that she was telling the truth in this moment. Following this, we then see the burnt up nutjob Naragi go on one of his killing sprees once again, before of course the legend Aguni himself took it upon himself to pick that fucker up and run off into the abyss with him on his shoulder. We then see that as the beach is burning around him, Samora lays there and waits for his death, seeing that living without this place would just be pointless and simply would rather die in this moment than to go on and live with the others. We then see towards the end of the episode that Arisu has finally found the Game Master's HQ, but instead of finding a way to escape, he only finds more questions, as all that awaits inside is the bodies of the staff members that used to run the games. It's again presumed that they all died to the sky lasers, although we can't really say that for certain, at least for all the bodies. But now of course that does it for every death in season 1. However, next we move on to season 2 of the series, which of course comes with even more insane games and death scenes, with the first deaths being seen being the deaths of several players at the same time at the very beginning of episode 1 of that season. You see, here we see a mass panic and deaths by the King of Spades himself, who's basically going around as a one-man army and slaughtering everyone in his path. And while I can go through and point them all out one by one, I think that would just be redundant and pointless. So here's a quick run through of them all in this brief little montage.
King of Spades.
But now with all those killings out of the way, in the next episode we get the King of Clubs game itself, which of course is a team-based game designed by the citizens of that area. The goal of the game is simply to collect the most points possible within the 2-hour time limit. However, after losing all of his points, Shitara, one of the citizens, gets shot through the head by one of the sky lasers, shocking both us the audience and everyone in the game. Now following this, in episode 3 of the season, we continue with the deaths of Shitara's teammates, the King of Clubs citizens. First, we see the king himself in all of his naked glory die to one of the sky lasers. However, he is soon shortly followed by his 3 other teammates, which in all honesty kinda sucked and pissed me off, as even though he was a naked weirdo, he was still one of the coolest and wisest characters of the entire show that we have ever seen. And I'd even go so far as to say he's potentially my favourite character of the show altogether. But now to just get back on topic, before the game finally ends, we get one more death, which honestly shocked me and many of you the moment we saw it. It was of course the death of Kode Tata, who of course bled out after cutting off his own hand so that Arisu had a chance of winning. This death alone still stands to this day as one of the most shocking that I think we've ever seen in the entire show up to this point. And honestly, going out like that has made Tata, a fairly pointless character, into one of the cooler characters of the entire show, at least in my opinion. But now to just quickly move on, next we move over to the Jack of Hearts game, which of course is played by Chichia himself. Here you must guess the suit on the back of your neck. However, to find this out, you'd first have to trust someone enough to tell you the truth about what the suit is on the back of your neck, as there is no way for you to find out on your own. As a result of this, and people just being untrustworthy as fuck, we soon see a lot of people fail and die. As was of course seen when this bald guy tried to beat the answer out of some random poor guy, only to have him lie to him about what the shape actually was, which of course then soon resulted in him failing the game and dying before the next round. Now again, I could go through and explain every single death that happened in this game, however I believe that would be annoying for both me and you to do, so instead here's a quick look at the less interesting deaths before I come back and explain the others.
Please give your answer.
It's a spade.
It looks like your symbol is a club.
Yes. It's club.
Club.
Yes, club.
Yes.
Club it is.
It's a club.
Please give your answer.
Diamond.
Spade!
I won't do this.
Now of course with all those deaths and the pointless characters kind of out of the way, we come down to the final remaining 5 players of the game, with Chichia being the only one currently with no teammate of his own. However, even with multiple people lying about the shape on the back of his neck, he doesn't actually get killed off, and still manages to guess correctly based off of knowing that the others would lie to him, showing us the kind of conniving genius that this guy really is. Now at the same moment when he of course guessed correctly, Kotoko on the other hand, trusting the guy who turned out to be Jack of Hearts, of course did not, and as a result had her neck blown off by the collar around her neck. This of course meant that the remaining players now know who the Jack of Hearts really is, which also means that they can finally get some answers out of him before the game ends. However, it does also get mentioned later that he did also die in this moment as a result of losing the game. It's just never really shown, although we do see the Jack of Hearts blimp explode in the background of this scene. We then see a videotape with at least 3 random people dead on it, although it's never really clear on how they actually died. We then see several other bodies belonging to those who have died to the King of Spades, as well as a random guy who bled out shortly after being found by Arizu and Usagi. The final death is then seen on another tape and is the death of a random girl who gets shot in the head through a window by the King of Spades himself. We then see several more people die in episode 5 when the arena collapsed during the 7 of Spades game. We then see the body of a man who has killed himself hanging from a tree later on in that episode. Following this, we see one more dead body in that episode, and it is the body of a random woman who has appeared to have died in the back of a car a very long time ago. We then move over to the next game of death, which is essentially a giant game of tag, where once you get tagged, you join the opposite team. Here, after a lot of running, fighting, and jumping, we see that in the end, Arisu and Usagi win the game, and as a result, the Queen of Spades herself is soon killed off just like the king from earlier, with a giant red laser shooting from the sky through her head and body. We then move over to the King of Diamonds game, where Chichia is dominating yet again. Here we see 2 random players, Asuma and Yashiki, get acid poured on them after they both lost the game. However, they are soon followed by Diamond after she too lost the game to both Chichia and Kuzuryu. We then of course see Kuzuryu, the King of Diamonds himself, also lose to Chichia in the final showdown, although that was more of a sacrifice on his part rather than a straight up loss. However, all the same, it did also result in his death. Oh, and at some point during the game, we also got a flashback where we see a young boy die to some random illness out in the real world. An illness he had a chance of surviving from up until the point that someone with more power and money came along and took his place on the donor list, basically highlighting the imbalance that power and money has out in the real world. We then move on to episode 7, where we begin by seeing a random player die after slitting his own throat in the middle of the street. We then see towards the end of the episode that once again the King of Spades is up to his old tricks and is wiping out pretty much any player in his path. We then see after a sick fight between Aguni and the King of Spades himself that they finally manage to lead him to an explosive trap in the building, where they blow him up after jumping out of a window. However, this doesn't actually completely kill the cunt off, so Aguni takes it into his own hands and puts a bullet into that fucker's head. We then move over to the final game of the season, which is of course the Queen of Hearts game, led by that crazy bitch Mira Kano. Here we see Mira absolutely fuck with Arizu's head for most of the episode, until in the end he finally overcomes all of her bullshit and wins, which of course then results in her getting killed by the sky lasers just like all the leaders from the previous games. We then finally move over to the most recent season that has been released, which is of course Season 3, a new season with a whole load of games and gruesome deaths for us to talk about. So with that said, let's begin with the first death of the season being the death of this random guy playing some weird variation of Old Maid. Here he loses in the end and gets electrocuted to death by the device that is placed under his table and chair. He is followed shortly then by this woman who gets up out of the table, leaving the game area, who is also followed shortly by this woman who loses and dies. She then is followed shortly by this man, and this man. We then come down to a 1v1 with just 3 total cards remaining. If this guy picks right and gets the Joker, he of course wins. But if he picks wrong, he of course dies. Now after a bit of trickery on Ryuji's part, he ultimately goes with the ace and loses, which of course means he dies. We then move on to a fortune game with Arizu being one of the players. Here, after the girl answers the math equation wrong, she gets shot through the neck with a flame arrow, which I can't lie was a kinda cool but extremely messed up way to go. We then see this random old man die in much the same way, before then soon being followed by this random guy who leaves the game area and dies to the sky lasers. We then see this woman get her question wrong, which of course results in more people being shot and killed by the flame arrows. We then begin to see multiple people get their questions wrong, and of course result in the deaths of not only themselves, but also the other players around them. We then see Arizu manage to find an underground tunnel towards the end of the game, only for 3 random players to not make it in time, and die to another 100 million arrows that is currently being shot from the sky. We then move over to the zombie group game in the neighbouring building, where we see that during the game, this guy, in an attempt to reduce the zombie card holders, places a shotgun card on the table, which of course results in the zombie being shot and killed. We then see this happen again and again to multiple different players all throughout the game, before the game eventually ends with 32 zombies and only 13 humans remaining. Meaning of course with more zombies than humans, the zombies of course win and the humans of course lose, resulting in all 13 of the remaining players being shot by the sky lasers and of course killed. Now after some time we then see that another game has begun elsewhere in the world, a weird game of laser tag. Here if the lasers hit you, you of course die, just like this random guy who was split in 2 and this guy that Ryuji used as a shield. We then see multiple dead bodies on the ground of the arena as Ryuji and Usagi escape the building. However, staying with them for just a second longer, we arrive at the next game of death, which is basically a guessing game on a train. A game where you have to decide whether or not you use your mask in the train car, as the air being put into that room has a possibility of being poisonous. Here, the first 2 deaths that we actually see come from the neighbouring train that is passing by. Here we see a number of players who guessed incorrectly dying in a horrific way due to the poison that is being placed into their train car. We then see several players on our own train follow suit shortly after by deciding not to wear the mask in the next round. We then see in the next episode and towards the end of the train game that they decide to jump to another train. Only while attempting to do so, 2 random players don't actually make it and get squished against the wall as a result. Following this, we then see in a flashback that Ryuji, as a professor, was trying to simulate a near-death experience with one of his students. However, he eventually fucks up and she of course dies as a result. We then move back over to the semi-finals of the game, which consists of 2 games in total. One where Usagi is playing a giant game of bingo on Tokyo Tower, and the other where Arizu must kick and find the missing can in the given time limit. However, along the way there are also areas around this building that you cannot go. However, here we see a random guy ignoring this rule and dying to the lasers as a result. Following this, we see another guy make it back to the starting point with the can just a second too late, of course resulting in him failing the game and dying in a massive explosion. However, he wouldn't actually be the only one that this happens to, as shortly after this, in the next round of the game, we see that another guy dies in much the same way. We then see Big Sis herself get caught up in an explosion of her own while trying to reach the starting area. She's then followed by Little Sis after all her time was spent fighting some random bitch. We then get the final round and death in Arizu's game when the Yakuza legend himself, Kazuya, fights for his life against a pile of nobody losers. Sure, he dies in the end, but don't let that make you forget just how badass he was in that final moment. And the fact that without him taking out 3 men on his own, Arizu would never have made it through this game alive. The guy's a fucking legend, I don't care what anyone says. Now we then go back to Usagi's bingo game, which was actually taking place at the very same time as Arizu's game. I just decided to put it back a moment as to not ruin the momentum of the video. But anyway, here we see several players fall to their deaths during the game. Some from the random metal balls that were being dropped on them, and others from Usagi failing to save them. Either way it happened, they all died. However, eventually she did manage to clear the game by reaching the final button at the very top of the tower. Next we see that during the final game, Tetsu, the stupid drug-headed cunt, picks only the good doors and loses all of his points, resulting in a game over and his head being blown off by the collar around his neck. He is then followed in much the same way by Sota, who spent all of his points on his sister, only to be separated from her in the end. We then finished off the games with Arizu finally getting a confrontation against Banda himself. However, after a lot of talking and some swimming, Banda is eventually killed off by the game masters themselves when they shoot him through the head with one of their sky lasers. We then see Ryuji save Usagi, but eventually choose to go to the land of the dead rather than to go back to the land of the living. Here it was presumed that he would die, however this was later confirmed to be true after his physical body in the real world was confirmed dead. Which of course also marks the final death in the entire Alice in Borderland show. Now of course that also does it for this video explaining every death in Alice in Borderland so far. However, there has been a ton of hints at a possible season 4 coming in the future, so of course if that drops, I'll of course have to make a video on that as well. So if you want to stick around for when that happens, like this video down below and subscribe while you're at it. But for now, above anything else, I just hope you enjoy the rest of your day or night wherever you are, and peace.